afternoon, everybody. My name is Alexander Ipatov, and welcome to the onlinechesslessons.net video section. Today we are gonna examine the Nbd2 variation of the Slav Defence. Our position arises after the moves d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6. The main moves, according to the theory, are knight c3 and e3 move. But today we will take a look at the Nbd2 move. This move is not really often guessed on top level, but it promises white an interesting game, avoiding the main theory. So, Nbd2, and here we are at the first branching point. The main move for black is, of course, bishop f5. It's the most common move in the position. Black is developing a piece and going to continue the development with natural follow-up: e6, knight bd7, bishop d6, castle, and queen e7. So this is the main move. We'll examine it in the last order. So another move is e6. Black wants to build a very solid setup with knight bd7, bishop d6, castle, then for example castle, queen e7, then b6, bishop b7, centralizing the rooks and pushing c5 or e5 later on. So there's a second option for black, and the third main option is the move g6. It reminds us some Schlechter variation of the Slav Defence, with that small difference that white's knight is already on d2, not on c3. White can take some advantage of it because the knight from d2 protects the pawn on c4. So here white can play either e3, either g3. We'll take a look at both options, of course. So, and another move is bishop g4. It's not really a logical follow-up for black because the knight on f3 doesn't need any defense, because the knight from d2 covers the f3 square as well. So this is not a really good move, but we will take a look and we'll try to understand why it's so. So I propose to start with the move e6. As I mentioned above, black's idea is to play knight bd7, bishop d6, castle, queen e7, and then to develop the light-squared bishop to b7 after playing b6 first. This is a very solid setup, and the only chance for white to prove an advantage is to play g3 here. In normal Slav defense, the white stays on c3 and not on d2, and from d2 it protects the pawn on c4, so white can play g3 without protecting the pawn on c4. The main line in Slav defense goes e3, for example here, e3, because white needs to protect the pawn, and g3 in here is not that good because black can simply grab a pawn, d5 takes c4. So that's a small nuance in this position. e6, g3, and the knight bd7. Black is going on with his development. Bishop g2, bishop d6, castle, castle. So this is let's say a starting point out of the opening. Now white has to choose the most logical continuation of the development, and to choose his further plan. The most logical plan, in my opinion, for white is to push e2, e4, and to win a space advantage in the center and play the pieces on the best squares as possible. On the other hand, the black's plan is to push e5 also, after some preparation or even immediately. So, as we can understand, the main fight goes around central squares e4, e5. Also, d4, d5 are also important. So, in the next moves, for both sides, it's important to take control of the center, and we'll try to look how it goes. Queen c2. White is preparing the e4 move, and black just plays, for example, b6. e4. Black must take. Knight takes e4. Knight takes, queen takes. Bishop b7. It's quite a typical pawn structure for many openings, not only for the Slav defense. White has a space advantage, while black has a very solid position. Pawns e6, c6 are controlling the d5 square that white doesn't have the d4, d5 promotion. Also, black can play later queen c7 and c5, opening the diagonal for the like-squared bishop. So, also another possible promotion for black is to push e5. So white should be careful with both plans by black. So here we play rook d1, because if black is going to play e5 or c5, the d file will be opened. So white just develops a rook on active square, and the next move should be bishop f4. Let's look at it. Queen c7. That's a possible move. For example, if queen e7, then white might play bishop f4 immediately. If bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, and I think white is much better because of better coordination of its pieces. Bishop g2, then knight might go to e5 later, rook from a1 to c1, and maybe even to push c5, keeping the bishop on b7 passive. So maybe queen c7 is a good move. So here we can play queen c2, because black's idea is to push c5. So queen c2, c5, and of course white should go for d5. And I think white keeps his opening advantage, because black must go for e takes d5, c takes d5. And now the bishop on b7 is not really well standing. The same we can say about black's bishop on d6, queen on c7. And white's pieces are really well coordinated. Queen from c2 is looking on the h7 pawn, and the attack on that square can be followed by the knight g5 move. Also, we should admit that the pawn on d5 is not really a weakness, like after knight f6, but because white has knight h4, defending the pawn on d5 by the bishop and rook, and threatening to move the knight to f5. Also, we should consider the option of playing bishop g5 later on. So I think that's in a very comfortable position for white, and much easier to play. So e6, g3, knight bd7, bishop g2. Another option, not bishop d6, and another option is bishop e7. So castle again, castle, queen c2, and b6 here. Now e4, and here black is not taking on e4 because the e5 promotion is not threatening, because the bishop is on e7 and not on d6. So black plays bishop b7, e5, knight 8, and here just rook d1. White has a space advantage, but as I already admitted, black's position is pretty solid, and the typical move c5 is also in the air. So rook c8, b3, c5. A really complicated position, but in my opinion White keeps some opening advantage because of space advantage and slightly better squares for his pieces. So bishop b2, and then White is going to play rook ac1, finishing the development and preparing some exchange in the center like ed5, and then if bishop d5 then maybe knight c4, or after rook ac1 White can play queen b1, moving the queen from c file. White has a lot of plans, and I think as a conclusion White is better. So that's what we looked in general about the e6 move. Now let's take a look at g6. Okay, as I already told, it reminds the Schlechter variation of Slav Defence, but with that small difference that knight is on d2 and not on c3, and that advantage that knight from d2 covers the c4 pawn, so that White can go for g3 again without protecting the pawn on c4. So g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castle, castle. It's a very typical position which can arise from Grunfeld defense as well, maybe by some other transpositions. So black has a really wide choice here. So black can play bishop f5, very logical move, developing a piece, and here b3. White also wants to finish the development with bishop b2, maybe then rook e1, knight h4, and pushing e4. So for example, a typical move, knight bd7, bishop b2, rook c8, rook e1. So White's plan, as I already told, is to play knight h4, and when black's bishop moves away from f5 to push e4, winning a space advantage in the center. I think White has a slightly better play because black doesn't have an active plan at all. For example, c5 is a mistake because of c takes d5, and knight d5 is not possible because of e4. So okay, but maybe knight b7 is not really the best move. a5, it's what theory says. For example, last year Magnus Carlsen played a5 against Timur Rajabov and managed to equalize easily the position. So bishop b2, a4. Black's plan is pretty easy to understand. He wants to exchange the rooks on a file, but the position becomes more simplified, so that black reduces the dynamical potential of White's pieces, of White's position. So it's a really interesting plan by black, and maybe it's even the best one. So because of that, in my practical games I started playing e3, not g3. Bishop g7, bishop d3, castle, castle. Almost the same as Slav Defence, but with knight on d2. So for example, if black plays bishop g4, white just goes h3, bishop takes f3, and knight takes f3, not queen. And for example, some typical move like e6, then white just goes on with developing other pieces. Knight bd7, bishop b2, queen e7, queen e2, rook fd8, rook fd1, rook ac8, and rook ac1. So okay, white is slightly better because of a bishop pair and some space advantage in the center, which can be grabbed by playing e4 later or just maneuvering the pieces. In long stage, the game just goes around two results. So bishop g4 is not so good, and for example, knight e6 is a really possible move. Black wants to play c5, fighting for the center. So here my proposal goes queen e2. This year I played the game against ex-world champion Alexander Halifman, and the game was c5 here. A good move. And I took cd5, knight d5, bishop a6, b takes a6, d takes c5. Well, white is a pawn up. Also, black's pawns on a6 and a7 are doubled, but we should not underestimate the potential of black's pair of bishops and counterplay on the b file. So that was my game against Alexander Halifman. I think until the move 20 I was able to have a good position, but then I just ruined in a few moves and lost. So it seemed that knight e6 is a much better alternative than bishop g4. But now I'm thinking that cd5 is not really that good as I played in the game. I think b3 is better because white does not clarify the position in the center, keeping the struggle, and just want to play bishop b2, rook ac1, rook fd1, finishing the development. So I think this is the best continuation for white. Maybe it promises a slight advantage as well. So okay. So that was a g6 variation. And now let's take a look of bishop g4. As I already told it, it's not the best one for black, and now I'll explain why. White goes immediately knight e5, attacking the bishop on g4. So black must play again with the bishop. For example, bishop h5 is again not good because of really nice idea by white. Queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7. Black must go queen b6, and here incredible nice move queen h3, with a double idea to check on c8 and to push g4. So black must play e6 because the queen c8 check is really annoying. And here white goes on g4, bishop g6, just take, and g5, and white is nearly winning. So that was, and for example, bishop e6 is much better than bishop h5, and here in my opinion white keeps an advantage after e3. knight d7, and c takes d5. So black has to play cd5 because all other moves favors white because of advantage in the center. For example, knight d5, white can play knight d3, and after completing the development to push e4. So cd5, and here white has a few alternatives. Maybe even to take or d7 or to play knight f3, what I propose. Knight takes, and here knight takes. So white has a few ideas in the future. For example, queen b3, attacking the opponent b7, or just check, bishop b5 check. So I think white is slightly better again. So because of this, I think bishop g4 is not that good, because white grabs an advantage by playing actively. That's the key in white's plan. So bishop f5 is a main move, like in main lines of Slav Defence, for example, e3, bishop f5, knight c3, e6. This main theory with thousands of games, and here white goes knight h4. So that's just for comparison. So knight d2, bishop f5, and here white should go immediately knight h4. Because if playing like in the main theory, but just with knight on d2 and not on c3, is not that good for white, because black can play h6, and in the future the knight h4 will be not that effective because of bishop h7. So knight h4 is a good move. Bishop e4. If bishop g6, it's a little bit passive, because white takes, knight takes g6, h takes g6, e3, e6, and here a3. A really good move. White is preventing the bishop b4, followed by knight e4, with further simplifications. And for example, if bishop d6 now, then g3, knight d7, bishop g2, castle, castle. So what we have now? White has a bishop pair, more active pawn structure, let's say like that, and possibility of active play on the queen side. b4, bishop b2, maybe bishop c3, and then a4, b5, c5. Another plan is just to open up the position with e4. And black, I think, does not have a really active plan, because if black goes on e5, it will make the bishop on g2 just more active on this diagonal. So I think white is better, and much better. So good move is bishop e4 here. Black is wants to provoke white to play f3, bishop g6, and now knight g6 is not that good, because the king is a little bit weakened by playing f2, f3. Black can play later queen c7 with further attack of h2 pawn. So white should go for queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7. Black has two options, queen b6 and queen c7. Okay, queen b6 is with a clear intention to exchange queens and to equalize the position in the endgame. But I think white still keeps an advantage because of bishop pair. Let's look. Knight takes g6, h takes g6, cd5, cd5, queen takes, pawn takes, and here knight b3. Knight c6, and just king f2. Okay, white has a bishop pair, black's pawn structure on the queen side is spoiled, and white's plan is really easy to play bishop d2, play then g3, king g2, e3, then another bishop to d3, rook from h1 to c1 with further play on queen side, and maybe even thinking about the promotion e3, e4. So white has a stable slight advantage. The game goes around 2 results, I think so. So more active for black is to play queen c7. And here very nice idea for white is g4. It was discovered by my coach Strav Grivas, and after he showed me that variation, I started playing in my games as well. So g4, white's idea is just to play g5 and then take on d5. So black plays e6, and here e4. It looks a little bit dangerous, but it's not like that, because black has to go on first variation d takes e4. If bishop e7, then white can play knight g6, h takes g6, cd5, cd5, e5, knight d7, f4. We have a pawn structure similar to the French defense, but in a really improved version for white here. Also, we should not fear the check from h4, for example, bishop h4 check, then king d1. The position is closed, so black cannot really take advantage of white's position, of white's king position on d1. For example, knight c6, knight f3, protecting the pawn on d4, and with idea to continue its development of pieces like bishop d2, rook c1, bishop d3. Yeah, so white has a space advantage, and once again a bishop pair that in a long run promises a really stable advantage. So that was the bishop e7 move. And now let's take a look at the most ambitious for black, d takes e4. Here of course white should go for g5, attacking the knight, and when he goes away from f6 to take on e4. For example, knight h5, then knight takes g6, h takes g6, knight takes e4. What can we say about this position? White again has a bishop pair, very typical for the variation with knight bd2. Then also space advantage, more active pieces when looking on b7, knight in the center is also looking fine. Black's knight is out of play on h5, and it's not clear for black to which side to make a castle. So I think white's prospects are really better than black's one. For example, knight d7, bishop e3, castle, and castle. Then white might play h4, bishop h3, and in some moment d5, opening the position for, and which, as everybody knows, it's good for the side who has a bishop pair. So I think we look at the most principal variations for the knight bd2. Unfortunately, not many top players used to play it, so we cannot say it's that good, but it looks really interesting because it helps to avoid the main theory, which arises after e3 move or knight c3. and I think I can recommend this variation with Nbd2 for players who want to get a creative play and to avoid well-known variations. Thank you for your attention.